But welcome everyone. And we are recording tonight a conversation about the new community action team that has been set up at South Church and is really just still taking shape. And so we're going to kind of go over what that is, what it looks like. And I am joined by Rebecca Blake and Joanne Foster, who have both done a ton of work on making this happen. And they have also done some visuals for tonight's conversation, a little PowerPoint that I'm going to share. I'm going to begin and then I'm going to pass it on to them because they really are, they hold the meat of the vision and what we're going to present tonight. So I'm going to go to the first slide. We thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about some of the background of what brought us here. And so I would agree to do that. This conversation started around December of 2020, and essentially for a number of years, South Church for the last 8 years, and some of you, Valerie, some of you may have even more knowledge of this than me, but the Social Justice Associates a while back were sort of struggling a little bit with like, who are we, what's our purpose? And they, about, I don't know, I want to say like 6 years or so ago, started to coalesce on a little bit of a vision of who the Social Justice Associates were. And in doing that, they zeroed in on really wanting to do sort of deep, committed work in specific focused areas within that large umbrella of what is social justice work. And so they, rather than sort of being hodgepodge responding to sort of crises and sort of an assortment of different things, they really wanted to kind of zero in and focus. And so the Social Justice Associates started to sort of nominate a topic that they would stick with for 2 years. And I think at this point, they actually have two topics that they're exploring for a 2-year arc, and they may even overlap by a year.
So yeah, we have, but we're so thin on the ground that we're actually down to one new topic. So.
Yeah. And a lot of what it seems like the Social Justice Associates have coalesced around is really doing education and like relationship building, education, deepening into an understanding of and a connection to specific issues, which is really meaningful justice work. It seems, I'm a little bit removed, but it seems from my perspective to be healthy in terms of the SJAs having a sense of clarity of what they're doing. And then South Church also has a long history of community justice work in things like Seacoast Family Promise. COVID has had some impact on all of these things, but the soup kitchen relationship with Gather, with our shared plate giving is a huge one, where we are in direct support in various ways with our immediate community and justice work that's going on in our immediate community. And again, that's really important work. And I think South Church has a pretty healthy, potentially growable, but like healthy aspect of the work we do that's that. And then there is this part, which is like immediate witness, urgent response, things that kind of bubble up, crises that come up. And there hasn't been a real clear process over the time that I've been here of how we navigate those things. So it has felt a little haphazard. And sometimes things have been scooped up and handled with real beautiful response. The Orlando Vigil comes to mind as like a really remarkable way that South Church both utilized the space that we can offer to the community, but also recognized that that was an instance where we were a good place to center around the grief of that moment. So there are some great examples over the years of things that South Church has done in terms of community response. There are also examples of times where there were pretty big community things that came up where South Church wasn't really nimble enough or wasn't clear, there wasn't really that kind of immediate response. And so that's what sort of began this conversation, was how could we have a better framework process that's not too cumbersome, but that allows us to be a little more consistent and also allows us to develop some of the underlying sort of skills for discernment of how do we decide when we are going to respond or not? How do we decide when something happens, if it is something that we should be a primary person responding to, or should offer our support to other people who should be the primary person? And a great example of that, this was the community action team wasn't really in full effect yet, but when the Black Lives Matter, when the crisis happened right after COVID last summer, with I cannot believe
George Floyd.
Thank you, George Floyd. I was like, I cannot access his name right now, and that's killing me. When George Floyd was murdered, that was an instance where South Church really recognized this isn't a place to center ourselves, but how can we serve in support of the actions that are happening? And so we had put the sort of commitment flags up on the front fence and tried to publicize for people to participate in the Black Lives Matter marches and things that were going on. I don't know if it was like handled greatly, but there was some of that discernment happening. So these things have been starting to take shape. And this year, especially, the conversations around, okay, what would it look like to have a community action team? And how can we make that both nimble enough to be responsive, but also have some structure and some function around it so that it's not too much of an ask on people. And the work that has happened this year has been really remarkable in kind of coalescing around that. And so that's what we're going to kind of go through tonight, as far as I understand. And then also just name some scenarios and talk about how do we think this is going to work as we go into sort of the testing period and start to pull together the wider network of folks who we can put the call out to when we are doing the response.
Great. So thank you. And I'm just going to talk a bit about sort of the overall purpose and goals of the community action team. And as you mentioned, it's really its goal would be to provide that nimble response, that immediate response with some clarity when something happens. And it's a way that South Church can support our values and larger community as well. In responding to things, it would provide a safe and supportive structure. So, if someone, we'll go into examples later, but the community members can respond to current social and racial justice events. At this point, we had talked about, climate issues, which can also be, social justice issues. There are lots of examples that we'll get to later, but it's trying to give some framework around a response. It would also increase the presence of South Church in the community of social justice workers in the area, deepen our relationships and our partnerships with other community groups in the area, hoping to augment existing community organizations and efforts in the community. I think one thing we want to avoid, there may be times when South Church, it's totally in our purview to go front and center and take an issue and say, this is our event and we're going to be hosting something. Other times it's going to be really as background, because we don't want to be the great white savior on the white horse coming in and saying, we know what's best for you. But to provide that backbone support, and sometimes it may be what feels like real background support, but whatever is needed. And if there are material needs of the community, there may be instances where that needs emotional needs of the community, but continue to work as part of a network of progressive response within the community. And so there's the process of we should do something, who wants to do something? Kirsten, what should we do? Valerie, you're involved with this, can we do something? Side of fractured. So the idea is if we have a leadership group of however many people, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't think more than 10, if we're lucky to get that many. People have an interest, some experience in social justice work. Do they have expertise with issues? Do they have contacts in the community? and always going to be a member of the senior staff. And Kirsten is it for the time being, and hopefully for a long time. But see how things going. And the team's job would be that discernment. It would be something's happening, a call to action comes to us. We as a group would figure out, is this in our purview? Is this something we should respond to? It may be the issue is fantastic, but the people who are asking us to help them, aren't kind of aligned with our values. I mean, so it's really, it would be a group of people to first say, like, should we respond? How should we respond? What should we do? And then within that leadership group, we got to the point trying to figure out, well, do we have a 1-year commitment of someone being in charge, 2-year commitment? Do we have this, that? And then we thought it might be easiest because we do want this to be a rather facile group. It can come together. It doesn't need to be together all the time because issues, aren't every month, thank goodness. But there'd be one person in the group would be like the point person at the moment. Call to action would come in, that person would say, okay, it's call to actions come in, group, let's talk about it. Great, you can do this, you can do this, you can't do anything, that's totally fine. We'll get you next time. I'll make sure as a point person to get the call out to a wider network of volunteers. And then after that event, the response thing happens, I then pass the torch to Valerie. And Valerie's now going to take on the next call to action. So it's kind of a rotating basis. Nothing may happen for 3 months. But then something happens, you're kind of in charge, and then you can still be a part of the team, but someone else is going to do that, the delegating, the facilitating for the next event that comes
Who's
up.
watching the sky for the bat signal for that period of time, right?
Oh, exactly. We needed that. Oh, no, it's a cat signal.
Yes, right.
And then,
Here, logo.
and then the community action team network. So modeled like the pastoral care network, a wider range of volunteers, which may end up being the entire church. We certainly wouldn't exclude anyone, but if we can get work on a list of people who perhaps have connections in the community, or at least are people who are like, I can't organize anything right now, but if there's a rally, I'm there, let me know. So those volunteers would be sort of a longer list of people that we would then tap into helping support whatever response we're.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So before I was going to just go in a little deeper dive into the call to action, I just wanted to take a second. I only go back to the slide because I have notes on it. Just to recognize that for the past 8 months or so,
yes.
all of this was developed by a group of sort of a planning group that we had put out a call, and we had volunteers, and Valerie Hagan was part of that with Rebecca and I, and Anna Howard and Molly Campbell, Marty Baldwin and Jim Versharon and Deanna Strand. So I just wanted to sort of thank all of them for all of this hard work, because it was a lot of discussion and lots of discernment to get to this point. And so I had some fun with graphics.
I've been great.
And I think it's been
Wow.
helpful to talk with Valerie a lot about this process, because sometimes you have something in your head and you think everybody understands it. So we thought that this is just the overview, and I'm going to go into a few more details. But so again, both Kirsten and Rebecca have talked about this, but there's an event or a crisis and a need in the community, and a call to action is simply an individual or an organization reaching out to South Church saying, we need your help, and we need your help in this way. And that again could be a member of the CAT leadership group who initiates a call to action. It could be an individual member or friend, or it could be an outside organization, anybody. And then that CAT leadership group is the group that does all that discernment. And then we say, yes, action, no, this doesn't fit. We let the group know. If it's an action, we go to the CAT network, and then we engage in the community action. So then a little bit of a deeper dive is to sort of, again, you'll see this event happens. There's a call to action. We did sort of develop in there's a so there's a public Google Doc now, and I'll go over again the link to that, but we have just a form that we had put together. But it could be a call or an email that comes into whoever that person is on call. And then, that person would kind of look to make sure they got all the information, either in the form or the email. And then, our commitment is, because this is sort of, we're supposed to be nimble and sort of a fast response, is that that person would get it out to the leadership group within 72 hours and say, they're really facilitating to make sure that, if Kirsten, make sure Kirsten gets this information and responds to it. And whether we hold a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, that we've all committed that we're going to pay attention to that information and engage in the discernment that I'll talk about in a little while. But that's really it. It's really the facilitators making sure, okay, Valerie, did you see this? What are your thoughts? And then again, it's action or no action, mobilize, cat network if there's an action, then you have the action. And one of the other things we really talked about is being committed to debriefing, right? And the sort of, feedback loop. And so the leadership group would do that again, and solicit input from anybody in the cat network who participated in that action and the individual organization that had initiated it, so that we can take that learning back to the next action and whatever processes, again, we don't have a lot of process developed in this. There's a form, we kind of outline how we're going to talk about things, but I imagine eventually there'll be more structure and process developed in this, and whether it happens this year, or whoever participates, or in the coming years. So this is the big part of it. So this group is going to go through some discernment. And again, there's not a lot of process written down right now, but these were some of the goals of that process, right? That obviously, whatever action is being asked of us, we want to make sure it meets our mission, that it is, as Rebecca said, it's sort of connected to the community, that there is sort of a legitimate need or group that is seeking our help or will benefit from whatever we engage in, whatever action we engage in. This is not something, this group is really looking at crises or time-sensitive events. And, we're talking, examples like, there's been a murder of a non-Black person. There's been, there could be let's just imagine the New Hampshire legislature passes a very restrictive abortion bill, or they're about to pass one, so we need to respond to it. So those types of things. This talks about, so our part of our discernment is clarifying what the action request is, whether that is specific from the call to action from the individual, or whether we are going to come up with what that action is, and then assigning, within the leadership group, sort of different tasks, or if we need to go out to the wider network to get specific skill sets or interests, we do that. And then the last part of it is sort of thinking about not only serving our mission, but not, sort of talk a little bit about protecting our nonprofit status or standing in the community. So for example, if this was a very partisan organization or event, we wouldn't want to participate in that because it would put our nonprofit status at risk. Or if it was an issue that was going to be divisive in the congregation, we'd want to stay away from that. And we open up the questions. I'm sure there'll be other sort of, oh, wouldn't you want to consider this? But this is sort of the list that we've come up with so far.
All
So
right.
I'm going to throw it back to Rebecca.
Okay, yeah, and then just sort of outlining specific responsibilities as a member of the leadership group. You'd serve as a facilitator on a rotating basis per action, maybe could be once a year, could be twice a year. Be lovely if it never happened at all.
Right.
That won't happen. And be responsible to the meeting requests. So if you, life happens, and if something comes in, with the Women's March, I was going to be out of town that entire week. And so it's like, we should do something. Like, I can't do anything, I'm not in town. So absolutely, if you can't do anything, that's totally fine, but make sure someone else in the leadership team can respond. maintaining and actually creating connections, maintaining connections within a community of organizations in the area, whether it's Seacoast Outright, Black Lives Matter, Seacoast, whatever other communities that we can really tap into. So if there is an issue, I mean, that comes up, we could say, this issue has come to our, who can we reach out to see if they could use our support? And so maintaining a database of that information would be part of this group's responsibilities. Do the homework to make sure that an issue organization is reputable and legitimate. So it could sound great, but maybe the people who are part of that organization are just not working within the same covenant that we work with here, or someone else has worked with them before and they always drop the ball, they never follow through. It's going to be a headache. We can make that decision, make sure that it's an organization that we're putting our South Church's name in alliance with, so we want to make sure that that we are aligned. We can work in concert with already existing South Church resources and leadership. I mean, we're not trying to just we're doing everything on our own. Tap into SJA, tap into the staff, tap into other volunteers in church and for resources and legwork. And then maintaining the database of volunteers, maintaining the database of organizations that would be working with and reaching out with.
Yeah, I think especially the interconnection of the relationship with the SJAs and the CAT team. Not that they have to be the same people, but specifically that part of already existing South Church resources and leadership. If the SJAs are spending 2 years working on immigration and something comes up related to immigration, it's an obvious connection point, right? It would be ridiculous for the community action team not to be plugging in with that community of folks within our community.
Yeah,
who are,
totally.
right, and have those connections. So yeah.
And then for the wider volunteer network, their responsibilities and or opportunities would be responding to our calls of action, following through on an assignment. And it's hard with volunteers. We've all worked with volunteers. I mean, people do what they can do. But we hope that if someone's going to sign up for a task, that they show up. If they're interested, and some example came up, say there's an immigration issue happening in Dover. Jim Bashiran's on our wider network. We might say, hey, Jim, do you want to take, be the lead on this because that's right in your wheelhouse? And he may say yes, or he may say no, thank you, but he help out. So, but they're totally, it's not like we have to do all the leadership. If someone wants to, we can delegate. And then provide leadership, feedback to the leadership on the event, because we really want to know what's working and what didn't work so well, so we can, as this is in its nascent stages, and we want to make sure that we're able to continue to grow.
So we threw a lot out there, right? And for those who haven't participated in this process, I'm sure there are questions. We were going to just start by just going through some examples of what potential calls to action and how we might respond to them, and then thought you all might have some too, because I think for us, as we've been, the three of us lately, Kristen and Rebecca and I have been talking, it's been really helpful as we think about process to talk through examples, right? Because there's a lot of gray area in this, which I think is some people are comfortable with, but I think if you go through them thinking about it as examples. So did you want to start with one, or do you?
Sure.
So we had the Planned Parenthood one.
Yeah, how about this? Okay. Hey, Joanne, we've got this action form request from the Democrat State Committee. They want to host a rally here for the Democrats. What do you think?
Well, I would say that sounds really great. If they want to rent the hall, we can reach out to Jen or Reverend Susan, because unfortunately, I don't think we could support the Democratic Party alone. And I think others would agree with that, right?
Because it's partisan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Or
so-
dig a little deeper into what is exactly the issue that they are wanting to support, And if it's something that does go, aligned with our, mission as a church, then finding another format or way or organization, like not, I'm saying, like exploring a little deeper, because it could be something we very much are on board to support, except the way we go about it and name it might have to change.
Right, or maybe they have a different sponsor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, right, I think that one of the things that's gonna start to flush out as we navigate this is some of the sort of the edges of what as a faith community, what it's gonna help, I think, all of us learn a little bit more concretely, what are those flush out points? And what are ways that we can serve the community to have that kind of dialogue, but also walk the line that we need to walk as a faith community that isn't supposed to be aligning itself with a particular party, right? So in that instance, there is within our mission, the desire to be a space for community conversation and discussion, right? So there could be ways. So I think that instinct you have, Valerie, of what's underlying this or what are these other things is going to be helpful for us, especially in the sort of in the discernment and in the debrief part of, hey, I get this, but I also am watching, this redistricting happen, and it's really problematic. And I know it's the Democratic Party, but what the underlying thing isn't partisan. It's about equity, right?
And we want to broaden the support, and the way to broaden our experience has been is to not label a party, but to really the issue, which is like women's reproductive rights.
Right.
And then we can now we're, on board.
So as a community, I think it will help us really come into what it means to be living our mission and our values and walking the complexity of some of the lines of that, because I think politics in particular is very complex. It's tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so I think I love that debrief process, and I love the ways in which we can find things that are like we almost crash up against, like, oh, that wouldn't be something we could do, but there's still the curiosity around that of like, okay, but what could we do, or how can we help?
So I have a, no, go ahead.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So just looking at the community and what has been going on with the community, because you all of you've done a lot of work. But I only wonder about this because I remember a couple of years ago when there was a bombing at one of the temples, and the temple here had this amazing, beautiful, powerful gathering. And this is when Lauren was here. And so that I don't know what they call themselves, that group,
Ministerium.
the ministerium was together. And did they ever do any of this, or are they still together, or?
So, I mean, one of the things, that is affecting South Church in so many ways, right, is we're grappling with like, what happens when there is this hole in staff leadership and ministerial leadership, right? The ministerium itself had experienced that in a wider community way because Reverend Center, or not Reverend,
The rabbi.
the Rabbi Center passed away somewhat suddenly, got sick and passed away, and he was a really key part of the ministerium, as were Chris and Lauren. So there was like this big loss of that collection of ministerial leaders who were really invested in this. And yes, there was, I think, not so structured, but there was a sense of that kind of response. And I don't think that that we're precluded from still that being revitalized and being a big part of this.
Yeah.
But even in that instance, there were times over the arc of Chris and Lauren's tenure where they were on maternity leave or away, where big things happened. And again, it's like, you want to have something that holds some continuity and that helps hold some ownership within the church over the arc of those things. So it's both and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just made me wonder.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
Right.
And it was a really powerful and vibrant thing that they created, that co-ministry that they were doing. interfaith ministry.
So some of the other examples, because so I'll say, we got a call from the local homeless shelter and they are looking for volunteers to staff their warming center. I'm throwing it out, you're the CAP leadership group now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and so
What do we do?
if we were convening that conversation, I think the question, going back to the discernment process, right? One of the things that pops up for me is there's a crisis, right? It's freezing cold and they don't have enough people to staff the emergency shelter space.
right.
So it meets that, it is connected to the community.
Yeah.
The legitimate source. It seems like this is actually a great way to offer an opportunity for engagement with folks who are wanting to do justice in the wider community. So I think that would be my opinion that I would bring to the conversation around discernment with that. And it's an interesting example because it's not the same kind of crisis
Right.
that my head goes to,
Right.
which I think is one of the things that early in our conversation, we started to realize was the crises we go to are these sort of momentous things. Orlando, the Supreme Court passing gay marriage, like these big monumental
Yeah.
things, but temperatures below zero and a shelter not having enough people is a community crisis, right? And what a great thing if we are on their radar as a church that can be contacted in the midst of that kind of crisis and say, we need people this week to man. That would be, I think, exactly where we would want to show up.
It's so interesting. That's why I love having these conversations, because when you and I sort of were talking, Rebecca and I were talking about scenarios, I was thinking like there was one line we had early on in the description of the roles and responsibilities, and it said something about not serving individual needs. And so started to question whether is that what this is, but the way you frame it as really, I mean, it's a community crisis because
Right.
there's not enough volunteers to support,
Now, if it's an ongoing thing, it could be something that actually we need to, as a church, think about kicking from
right.
an urgent response kind of thing
Right,
to
longer
something
term.
sort of like our relationship with Seacoast Family
Right,
Promise or
right.
Soup Kitchen, of
Right.
like, hey, how about we create a team of people and get somebody to share that and move that into that other piece of our
Right.
justice response as a
Mhm.
church.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I hope. I was telling Rebecca and Joanne that I sort of see this as like a third leg on the stool of like how we do justice work at the church. And it almost helps us think about the other two legs more concretely, right?
Mhm.
It's like, this is for this response. These folks are doing this kind of work. These folks are doing this kind of work. And then all of a sudden you have something that's a little bit more robust without it being too cumbersome.
And then when I, for one that works for community organizations, I'm thinking, okay, where's the housing? Like they may reach out, but who's responsible for the housing authority? Then they actually have policies and on who can work in there and the training that needs to be done. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's
There's all the
nice-
logistics.
What's nice about the facilitator, like I've just seen it as a messenger. Like they gather the information, they might have their own personal opinion about it, but they really bring it into the bigger room, and just really discuss it, put it on the table. And then there is short-term crisis and long-term, addressing these crises and finding out information and, deeper into like what kind of organizations can support that long, like, are we partnering up? Are we giving immediate care? Like kind of like that. The other thing I just want to say of thought is, like, especially for Janet and Carol, like, I know for myself, when we were exploring this, like thinking co-create, like we are co-creating because this is on you. It's never happened before. And so far already it's been co-creation with great leadership. But moving forward, it is really, we are going to co-create it all together, whoever is part of that.
Yeah, but that's an excellent point, and it's, I mean, nothing is set in stone right now, right? We had a lot of conversations and come to where we are with how we think it could at least start to work, but who was ever on the leadership team could, as we work through events and situations, could realize, well, this works really well. That didn't work so well. Okay, how can we tweak things? And so, yeah, so it's all co-creating.
And I'll just say one more thing, like one of the things that I love about South Church is that I know that people look up to us.
Mm.
And they look to how we respond and they want to participate, they want that information. So we really represent real leadership in that area. And I think this is another level of stepping up to that new leadership in these changing times.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and I think too, there's been so much, I mean, there's, with the membership, with the people that come to South Church, been so much excitement through the years. Val, I remember when you really connected,
Moms in action.
the jail, when you did the work with connected with the jail. I mean, just for people to be able to, when you did the book drive to give to the mothers, to give to their children.
Yeah.
People want to do something,
Yeah.
especially in a time like this.
Yeah.
So, and people were so excited about that.
And it's so educational, like I
Yeah.
know before I got into it, it was like, what jail, what, and don't, like, it was like,
Yeah.
and it just awakens, you know, like, wow, like, there is that.
And you had the sheriff come and talk about it. Yeah, it was very powerful. So
Yeah.
to see that happen again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, I know for me, there was lessons about the way that you and Kimberly Cloutier-Green were interacting with the women's prison and mindful of the importance of not creating relationships that were empty, weren't rooted in that community, that it was not a place to sort of pop in and pop out.
Right, like a sacred space.
It is, yeah, and women who are navigating really difficult circumstances and, showing up to feel good and leaving the next day doesn't help. And so like, what are ways that you can help connect people that are healthy relationships and that are boundaried and clear about, the edges of that. And I felt like you both had some real depth of clarity around that. And I think that's one of the things that's really wonderful about working with one another, is waking up to different ways of thinking about like, oh, I do see, like even just like learning about what it means to center or decenter yourself in something, like these are all muscles to have us be better at shifting from, charity to empathy, right? To like, how are we connecting on a human level with people in our community and connecting around the struggle in our community in an authentic way, where we're showing up on seeing people as our equals, not as someone we're there to help us.
It also validates and affirms the work we're doing in however personally we do this, seeing the bigger picture. And right now, especially, I think, like if someone comes in and they say, well, we want to represent this, organization, like, and we go like, well, we need a wider picture, to attract, and then just like we get to also really affirm the work we're doing personally and collectively here in the community by the way we address, by the way we open up suggestions, and just the way that we look at life and things. And I think that's really healthy too, and needed.
Any other questions or thoughts? And we were just going to talk about some next steps, but so there is a public Google Doc file. This is the link, so it's just bit.ly South Church Cat. So we'll be popping this slide presentation. So if there are other part of, so right now we really want to form this leadership group. I think we've got, I'm going to just say it out loud because then we're committing them. Anna Howard and Molly Campbell have expressed interest. I believe Valerie Fagan is interested, and I'm hoping Janet Pulaski is interested, and I'm not going to put you on the spot yet, Carol, since you're here listening, but
No, it's very exciting.
yeah,
good.
so
I hope Joanne is interested.
yeah, no, Joanne and Kirsten are interested, yeah, so we might have a good team, but I still think we want to leave it open to see if there are other people who want to work at that level, which is great. And then the CAT network, and if anybody is creative on names, we were playing around with a name for the network rather than wider care network. I think you had
I
a
was
suggestion,
drinking
alley cats,
alley
which I thought was
cats.
great. So if anybody's good at that stuff, but I think one of the next steps is sort of setting up the process for that mobilization. And one thing was thinking, so we need to, like, I thought sign up Genius, I'm not sure, and maybe that's something Jen can help us with. And then also just, we need to get it, it's not said here, an email for the cat group that, so it isn't going to any one of our personal emails. I'm sure that's pretty easy.
Yes, very
I'm
easy.
sure it would be South Church Cat at social,
Yep.
at South Church.
Yeah, or
Dash.
community action at.
Yeah, community action, not
That's
that,
right.
community action team. So, and then the big piece of this next is, so it's all great sort of internally, if we've created this group and this structure and process, but we need to let people know, because otherwise it's just gonna be us
Right.
sending calls to action.
Right.
Early on, Anna Howard actually had started a database for us, and we have that, and I can also drop that into the file. But it's sort of making sure we have a robust database. I don't know if that's something that SJA has done any more work on since I left, but we, I think there were some starts. We should just make sure we have at least a decent start of the list, and
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, if it is, it's Dave did it, but that's
Yeah.
mostly unemployment stuff.
right, so, so that's a big piece of it, and then start contacting groups and some.
And I think that, yeah, I think that amongst us, there are connections.
Right.
Right, like Valerie has some strong connections with the Black Heritage Trail, and so like, that's a great anchor point potentially for something that comes up, or work we've done with immigration, and so we have the connection with the Quaker Friends, and like, those names, having those somewhere where then if something comes up that's like, you know what, let's do
Right.
an interfaith outreach around this. Let's see if we can do something with multiple, faith communities. Who has that? Like, it would be kind of at the fingertip, whether or not Janet was in the room or whether or not Valerie was in the room,
Right.
have those kinds of contact points. So,
And also just anybody who's good with reaching out and asking questions too. I mean,
Yes,
that's just
exactly.
willing to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it also sort of helps empower all of us of like, when we're making those relationships, hey, if there's ever anything going on
Yeah.
and you
Right.
need, contact us,
Yeah.
send out the cat signal.
Yeah.
But also, like, if somebody were going on with immigration and somebody didn't call Jim Verschuren,
Right.
that would be like, wait.
Right.
You don't want to
Right.
leave people out who are the obvious and who have invested so incredibly
Absolutely.
much.
And I think that
Right,
he
right.
did
Oh,
talk,
right.
and that's an important point to make. We
Yeah.
did talk about this, but I don't know if we said it tonight. But this isn't to say like everything the South Church does needs to come through the
Yes,
community
yeah,
action.
that's very good.
There are, like Jim Verschuren is a great example, like
Right.
deeply engaged, kind of used a similar process of like, hey, this seems rooted in our mission. We want to host someone during COVID when our building's not being used in other ways. Can we do this?
Mhm.
Right? Like,
We
that's
did that with
all,
Moms Demand Action.
exactly, that's all great. I think the thing is like, if I am just a member at the church and I want to see something happening, like, how do I?
What's the vehicle? for that?
So
Yeah.
for those folks who are already plugged into Social Justice Associates or other places where they know how to sort of get the ball rolling, they don't necessarily have to funnel through this, and it's not like we're territorial. But rather just having a structure in place so that there is some clarity for the folks who don't know how to navigate that.
Right. And
But I'm
you-
also saying we don't want to leave somebody out of our, we want to make sure that that's why database would be really.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly, right.
And who knows, in a few years, maybe those organizations will be reaching out to us saying, oh, we know that, Carol's worked with us in the past, the South Church is great, so enough reaching out from us and reaching back.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's.
I just want to say a quick thing that we discussed early on, but maybe Carol and Janet don't know, and I just want to put out, is that, the crisis situation, when we think about challenging situations and stepping up and support, but, putting forth that it could be celebratory too. And I think for me, like, that's really important because doing local political work right now with local candidates, and somebody says, hey, guys, this just happened and it's really good, and your letters worked and your postcards, that matters so much now, right now, and we need that. So I just want to say that it could be that a bill passed or something that connects us or whatever, we can really, make that really visible, and that people, we really need that today as a community and as individuals. Just those little steps are huge steps right now. So that, just to look for that, because it's also, where's our energy, and if we're looking and, I just think there's a certain vibe and energy when we are also looking for those little baby steps that feel so really vital right now and there.
Plus, there's so much energy here, in this community. And we all talk about it, everybody is under stress in some way, shape or form, and not stepping up. That's why there are not as many, I'm actually surprised there are not more people here, just because I know there's so much interest in this here. But to be able to see, just like with Pastoral Associates, with the Wider Network of Care, just to do that one thing and how that's built on, it's incredibly empowering. Yeah.
It's like medicinal right now, I think.
Yeah.
We need it, yeah.